There are two very, very different perspectives, different directives that govern the behavior of the European Central Bank and the U.S. Federal Reserve. Because in the case of Europe, it's a one-sided directive. Your only job is to prevent inflation. And in the case of the U.S., it's a more balanced, maintain employment and price stability.
The delegates who came here in 1944 gave the U.S. and the dollar the prime place in the world. Does the world need a leader like that now? And if so, which economy? Is it still the United States?
Well, there's a big question whether the U.S. dollar should be the main reserve currency. And in fact, it no longer is, because it maybe accounts for 2/3 of the monetary reserves. But the euro is an alternative, and there's a lot of diversification into other currencies and even more into commodities, not only gold, but actually oil. Oil is now an asset class for investors, and that has put some upward pressure on the commodities.
Do you think in terms of the euro, the sovereign debt crisis has diminished the chances of the euro's becoming a reserve currency?
Well, the euro is under some cloud, but that's exactly because there are some inflationary pressures from the price of commodities, particularly now oil, and also food prices have risen. And that is what has induced the ECB to raise interest rates at a time which is, in my opinion, quite inappropriate.
What about China? How much of a concern is the inflation there to you?
That is a serious concern, because China has really stimulated its economy full force very successfully, and now is trying to rein in the rate of growth, and is exercising very strong constraints on the banking system. But because of that constraint and because of the great demand for money, a shadow banking system has arisen and is growing very rapidly. So while the big banks that are under direct central control are in fact refusing to lend, there's this shadow banking system which is growing out of control. And that's now, there is a real danger there of wage price inflation, because prices have gone up, and particularly real estate prices have gone up because there was a real estate boom, and therefore wage demands have risen, and you now have 20-30% wage increases. So the Chinese government, I think, made a mistake not allowing its currency to appreciate, which would have controlled the price inflation. And instead of that, you now have this wage pressure, which is a little bit out of their control.
We're here to talk about new economic thinking to deal with the problems that arose by the outdated financial system. The Chinese current economic approach has only been in place for a couple of decades. Have they done something right that others should emulate over that time?
They have done. They were the major beneficiaries of globalization, and they were, of course, the big winners in the financial crash, because their economies was largely isolated because they have capital controls on their currency. They have a two-tier currency system, whereas the rest of the world, following the Washington Consensus, allows free movement for capital, and you had runaway expansion of credit and leverage, which then resulted in the financial crash. And China was largely immune. So they benefited tremendously. And their system, which is really stands in contrast to the international system. Let's say there's international capitalism with free movement of capital, and then there is what I call state capitalism, where the state basically controls the economy. And that system actually has performed significantly better than the international system. And so now it's beginning to be imitated by others. But I think it's a tremendous mistake, because that was just one particular set of circumstances when it worked better. And they had an advantage because they were the only ones that were controlling capital flows. So as a result, they not only controlled their own currency, they effectively were controlling the world currency system. So now other countries defensively are beginning to follow them. For instance, Brazil just doubled the surcharge on capital inflows. And that is not good for Brazil, and it's not good for the global economy.